Welcome to another episode of Hey We Need to Talk. We are recording an episode after a long time, and a lot has happened in the world, across the world since then. But in this episode, we'll be talking about Myanmar, where a military coup essentially replaced the civilian government on the 1st of February 2021, this year that is. And since then, a lot has happened and gone down in Myanmar itself, including the emergence of a very vibrant civil disobedience movement and an increasingly destabilizing security situation on the ground. And of course, Myanmar saw a devastating third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's still going on in some ways there. So what we see are sort of layers of crises stacked one upon the other. The latest grim statistics that we have about Myanmar is that the total number of civilian casualties crossed 1,000 last week. So by now the military has killed more than 1,000 civilians in the country within a span of 6 months or so, which is a sort of very painful reminder of what's going on there. Now to discuss the situation in Myanmar, we have Thinzar Shunlei Yi, who's a frontline activist and a part of the civil disobedience movement there. And she's also the Advocacy Coordinator at the Action Committee for Democracy Development. Welcome to this episode, Thinzar.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me as well.
Thanks a lot for joining us despite everything that's going on. And since you have been very much tuned into what's happening on the ground with the civil disobedience movement and with the protests, including on the internet that have been going on, which is a very, very unique feature of this round of anti-military protests in Myanmar's modern history. So, as I said earlier, Myanmar has gone through a lot since the coup in Feb. The extreme level of violence, the intensifying sort of insecurity on the ground amongst people, including in the cities, major cities like Yangon and Mandalay. And of course, the very, very devastating third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you see, it's a compounded crisis. So in light of all of these, what is generally the mood on the ground right now amongst the people? How are they dealing with this situation?
So every day is a threatening situation on the ground. Just recently, like for example, just yesterday night, I've been told by my friends like they are currently on watch of their streets and their building because they heard like the military troops are coming in and trying to surround their communities because they learn because of the intelligence in their communities and so on. So we can see every day that our people, especially young people, are living with that fear and the threat almost every day. So the midnight arrest, midnight raid, and the oppression, especially the tortures when they arrest young people, and basically not just torturing, but also they are trying to dehumanize these young people when in the interrogation center. So all this is happening since 6 months ago, keep going on. The military still freely kill people in different areas. Now even more, like under the conflict situation, they just name these young people and the youth group as a terrorist. And they escalate the war. So basically, many people in the country having economic crisis as well as health crisis at the same time. During the COVID pandemic, there was the third wave was pretty high, and we have lost all of our friends, family, even though they have made through the military arrest or killing. Even if they avoided the killing, they were killed by the COVID. So everybody is mourning every day for their family, friends. So that's daily situation.
Right. So, yeah, I think one of the things that the regime tries to also do is sort of break the spirit of the population, through things like midnight arrests, because I think one of the peculiar features of this midnight raids that you talked about is that it completely smashes the sense of security that people have in the confines of the home, that there's any moment a military personnel or armed police might barge into the house and arrest anyone or at worst shoot someone. So yeah, in general, how do you think the COVID situation is right now? Because it was pretty bad last month in July, if I recall correctly. I think from what we have been reading from the outside, the situation slightly calmed down. But how are people dealing with this pandemic in terms of sort of taking protection measures? And if you could also speak a little bit about the vaccination program, particularly that's going on, because there has been a lot of criticism with how the military government has been failing to deal or expand vaccination. So could you just tell us a bit more about these things?
Yes. So in the especially in July and the second week of the August, it was pretty high, and people have been panic, trying to get oxygen tent, and many people are trying to set up oxygen plants in different community and so on. And one of the reasons why we are seeing they are not panic anymore is because maybe many volunteers from different communities set up to build like service centers, to help the communities needing for the oxygen and different things. That's one of the reasons. People still need oxygen, but there are more open sources for the people to go and get oxygen tent and so on. There are many different oxygen plants also being installed by different rich people, cronies and daigons. They are also helping at the same time. But the military, they are still controlling all the public institutions like hospitals. So and also the quarantine center, everything is under their control. So it's not possible for any activists or any high-profile politicians to go through their processes, like go to a hospital, even if they are infected. They couldn't get proper medications or treatment because of their political activism. So I think the death toll is still going on like every day, but we're not sure because there is no proper institution built up yet to monitor the situation. So that's one problem. And regarding the vaccinations, we are pretty aware, like even for myself, when somebody asked me if I would get vaccinated by the military control program, I would say no, because we see what's the difference, because military is still killing people like in an open daylight, and if they vaccinated asked what's the difference. So and we don't want to give credit and we don't trust them. So that's the main problem. I think the same goes to many people out there, especially in the urban areas. They really want to be vaccinated. They trust in vaccination, but the point is they don't want to be vaccinated by the military. And they have set that clear to different international organizations such as WHO, different UN humanitarian organizations and medical groups. Like they want to be vaccinated by the NUG, National Unity Government, or different ethnic health organizations, because these ethnic health organizations just recently set up an ethnic national health committee headed by the ethnic leaders, and that operate different health programs in the border areas and ethnic control areas. So there is a ray of hope that we can get vaccinated through these programs, but it will take time. So right now we are being careful with UN programs because we don't want UN organizations under the name of humanitarian. They should not necessarily give credit to the junta or legitimacy to the junta, because that's the thing that the people in Myanmar are defending, giving up their life. They don't want to give legitimacy to the military. So the international communities must be aware of that very important fact.
That's interesting and quite sort of delicate sort of situation there, because of course the regime is known for its violence and brutality and mismanagement in that sense. So it could in a way use this vaccination program to strengthen its legitimacy, not just in front of the domestic audience, which is unlikely, but also in front of international audiences. You have been at the forefront of the protests and the civil disobedience movement. And one thing that we have clearly seen this time is how the protests and the demonstrations against the military has sort of completely captured the virtual space or the internet, right? So which is starkly different from the previous episodes of resistance that we saw in Myanmar, including the 2007 Saffron Revolution and of course the historic 1988 movement. So of course there is at a surface level we do see that these protests are somewhat different, right? And you also yourself belong to a new generation of activists who are much more fluid and dynamic in terms of the modes and mediums of resistance that they use. So could you, as a member of the front line young activist community in Myanmar. Could you just tell us a bit more about if you think these protests are really different from previous ones, and whether there is a new kind of generational shift in the resistance narrative in Myanmar?
Yes, it's obvious to see the main difference between, like, even with the nearest revolution that we had in 2007 and 2021 is the digital devices and the digital platform, social media. The power of social media is playing a huge role, basically to mobilize, organize, to inform, and to also train each other, to educate each other. So social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and also TikTok and different platforms also is risky because many of us inside the country don't have digital literacy, and we just have the devices. So these devices again become their weapons by the military juntas to track us down, to arrest us, to detain us, to also instigate us with the fear and the propaganda. So it's like a daily battle on the social media, trying to fight back the hate speeches or the fake news, misinformation. At the same time, the military is trying to take control of the platform. So when we had a coup in February 2021, it was not just the executive power coup, it's also a digital coup as well, because the first thing they did was to shut down all the communications, including social media. So they banned Facebook, Twitter. So we had to use VPNs to access to these websites and share information. So they know the power of social media because they have clearly used it against the Rohingya population in 2017 to drive the hate and the death threat to these community, and that led to genocide. We clearly learned that, and we're not yet ready to equip ourselves with that knowledge, with that awareness. But the coup happened, and then the role of the young people also play a very important role in this, because the young people quickly adapt to the digital world, and they are the ones who are teaching to their own family members and the community how to use VPN, how to be aware of the fake news and so on. So young people, especially the 60% of the population in the country, they are the ones who are effectively using digital power to not just to inform what's happening in Myanmar, but also to connect with the other different countries. Like MIGT Alliance is also a digital kind of collective amongst the digital activists and netizens talking about dictatorship. And that's how I guess the movement are changing, and the movement is also shaping and taking another positions in this 21st century, that they're going to be creative and more influential to our younger generations.
Do you believe the military government has that technical capability or that know-how to actually collect information about activists and in general the resistance groups through social media, through information, or through the internet? Do you think it has that capacity to do that?
I'm pretty sure they have the capacity to track us down and to even drive the narrative on the social media. But the point is, we are better. The revolutionary, the young generation, the Generation Z, especially the civilian people, right? The civilian young people are doing better than what they are doing. So the military is well equipped with the necessary devices, even with the finance, resources. The previous government have allowed to use, millions of budget to investigate our social media platform. They even form an investigation team on a social media, by the parliament in the past 5 years. So they have all the capacity, whatever they need, not just from their own technician, but also from Russia and China. They get everything they needed. And right. At the same time, something we shouldn't forget is, even before the military junta, the quasi-military in 2010, in 2012, before they allowed us to use internet freely and in a lower price, they already have equipped themselves with necessary skill and technique, and they have trained troops to to drive the narrative inside the country. So only when they are ready, they allow everyone to use it, and they didn't equip us with the digital literacy. So that's what happened in 2017, 2012, and 2016. We had the worst crimes that we can imagine, against the ethnic minority, especially the Rohingya and the Muslim minority inside country. So military have been well used, and they know how to utilize it.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Aung San Suu Kyi now, and she has been slapped with a battery of charges by the military government. The NLD has been formally disbanded. So essentially, the party regime or the party sort of structure that Aung San Suu Kyi was leading before the coup is practically gone, and she remains in house arrest. But tell me a little bit about how is she, as a political figure or a political leader, seen in Myanmar today in the post-coup context, particularly amongst the younger population? Is there still a huge sort of fan following for Aung San Suu Kyi, or is there some kind of a discussion for a post-Suu Kyi political future in Myanmar? And in general, when I say Aung San Suu Kyi, I also mean NLD as a party. So what's the mood on the ground regarding her leadership or her political future?
After the coup, then she was locked up in the house as a house arrest and so on. Obviously, when we see at the figures of the previous election, she remained the most popular politician in the country. Not just her, but also her party is the most voted winning party in the whole country. So we can't deny that she's still the head of everything in the country current situation. And one of the reasons many people say that because she was detained, many people went out, millions of people went out to march against the junta because she was detained. It's like they feel really pain when they see their mother suits being in jail and taken away from the power, from the thrones, So basically, that's a very basic narrative. Myanmar people have never had that kind of leader, like who is being internationally recognized, winning awards, and who can be keeping abreast of the international politicians and the leaders. So it's rare to see someone as a woman, as a mother figure. So she will remain as a figure in the Myanmar politics, even though she passed away. But the point is, the way she wanted the country, the way she was driving the country into where we were, and the way the young people, the young generation see we should be is different, totally different. And the way we go is also different. The goals may be the same, but the way we go for it is kind of different. So many young people started saying that after the military is over, like military coup is over, and the Aung San Suu Kyi get back in power. But if she keeps doing the same thing, just like what she was doing in the past 5 years, then we will revolt against her. So that's the mindset of the young population now. That means she's no longer a leader for the young generation, but she remains as a key figure in the whole politics, because the young people are not in the power positions. They're not the decision maker, even though they comprise almost half of the population. So the older generation, in her generation, they control the same narrative. So I think it would take a time that we can eventually go for a new narrative for the country's future.
Right. And how much do you think the NUG, or the parallel government that the deposed NLD lawmakers have formed, the National Unity Government, how much do you think the NLD commands credibility or legitimacy within the population, particularly the younger one, the younger population? Do you think it is seen generally, right? It is currently seen as a credible government, or sort of a government that represents their interests? Or do you think the NUG is still somewhere seen as a product of the older political elite, the NLD sort of elite? Because one of the things that the NUG has tried to do this time differently from the past is become more progressive and sort of cosmopolitan in its outlook, and certainly more inclusive, representational in its structure. We have seen Karens, Kachins and Chins hold top ministerial positions in the NUG. So do you think it's doing something right this time? And in general, what do people think about it?
So we used to say when we are in the biggest crisis, we show our best version, right? So now Myanmar is in the really big crisis, and we become the best version of ourselves. So NUG is the best version that we can imagine right now, like with the different inclusion and like different ethnicity, especially the young population, the young figures also in the cabinet and so on. So why it looks so different than the last year government, right? Just last year in 2020, we had a complete different cabinet and a complete different political scenarios. We still have 2008 constitution. It was taken too long for us to even repeat one article. And we were so worried, like as an activist, political activist, we were so worried if NLD will be normalized and the 2006 constitution, and they will keep defending that because that constitution is benefiting the ruling party, one party. So we're so worried that, but after 6 months long, things have completely changed. There is no constitution at all. And we see a complete different government, a national unity government that also recognizes the Rohingya population, that respect, trying to talk with different ethnic leaders and become a quite revolutionary government. So that clearly show what the NLD was doing was wrong, and what the NUG is doing is the better version of ourselves and how it should be. So NUG itself is still far from perfect from what we should be, but still is better than the previous version. But we are now in a different ground. Before, in the past 5 years, we were in the democratic ground and the 2008 constitution. But in 2021, we are totally on a federal democracy ground with the federal charter. And the federal charter can also be a different version, like that could go for another constitution. So we are now even feeling freer to think of our goal and ambitions. And I think as myself, as a young generation, I feel feeling better than the previous 5 or 10 years, because it was so confusing. And the 2006 constitution and the Aung San Suu Kyi leadership, she's trying to cover up the crimes of the NLD and crimes of the military, and we're so confused, what was happening. And now in the revolutions, we are clearly seeing who is who, and we are fighting for a better future, a better goal. So I think that's the best scenario for the young generation and for NUG to pursue better. They are on the right track, compared to what last 5 years.
Well, crisis often brings clarity, of thought, of vision. So, I mean, that's clearly evident in Myanmar right now. But again, I'm just keep going back to this again and again in my own head. What really is the generational shift, if at all, that Myanmar is seeing today? What are the new sort of political values and social values that this generation, that your generation in Myanmar, has today? What are the new agendas on the table? Because I this time within the resistance spectrum, I saw a lot of new conversations which perhaps weren't very much at the center stage in Burmese politics or resistance politics in the past. This time they emerged. For instance, there was a lot of focus on gender violence, against women in conflict, and you yourself have been a part of that movement, and you have mobilized on social media for that movement. So I just want to understand, what are the new sort of conversational points on the table this time amongst the younger people? What are the things that they care about and want to do differently from the past within the context of the revolution?
Yes, I guess, to be honest, they are different. As I said, we find ourselves in a clearer path than compared to what last 5 years or 10 years. There is no constitution that are restricting all of our freedoms. We're not like thinking under that boundary. We are having our own, we're trying to script our own script. We are trying to draft our own script. So that's how we feel quite hopeful that we could be a part of that discussion, and our voice could be an input for a new constitution and so on. So that's how many young generations are trying to bring out different values, different discussion conversations, or that were quite uncomfortable to discuss in the past. Like, for example, Rohingya crisis. It's the thing that the first was led by the young person. Like, he was holding the sign that I'm so sorry for the Rohingya crisis. I didn't know that, you were suffering that much, and the military, now so something of sympathetic message from the young people themselves also bring out, the values thing from us, like, okay, we see clearly how the military is reacting to it. So people feel quite close to that crisis, and they were talking about how to show solidarity. So solidarity is something that we learn through these revolutions, that we have to be in unity. If we are all in revolutions, that we have to help each other, we have to take care of each other, and be aware of our security matter. For example, we have to take care of our devices. That it was so hard to educate how to use VPN, even amongst activists. But now all the activists are using Signal, for example. We all have successfully migrated to it. So the digital security perspective, as well as the solidarity perspective, not just with the Rohingya, they are starting to apologize to different ethnic minorities for what they have gone through in the past 70 years, especially the young generations doing this. And also, when we talk about the women's leadership, we talk about what we say, the norms and the discrimination around women, basically the violence against women and the power of the woman in the revolution. We're not just victims. We're not just people to be pitied of, but they are the powerful populations trying to take a lead in revolution and so on. So I think the way we are looking at the woman is now more than just a victim and just a victim of different violences. It's now more like a comradeship, sisterhood, and we're all together. So these are like very visible things we are seeing along the process. So even after we don't get to where we're supposed to, we are already benefiting through this process by sharing, learning, and among ourselves. So these are like basic things that I learned.
Right. And I find it particularly interesting what you talked about, the inter-ethnic solidarity that the younger generation is trying to build, especially with the Rohingya, given their extreme persecution, the condition of statelessness that they face today. What do you think of the NUG statement on the Rohingya, where they formally recognize the name Rohingya and committed to sort of providing political rights to the Rohingya population, and also talked about inviting representatives from the Rohingya community in the constitution building process? Do you see this as a genuine political reform within Myanmar's, political structure, or do you see this as some kind of a strategic sort of move by the NUG to gain broader recognition?
So recognizing Rohingya name and giving them what they deserve, what they already have, is nothing to take credit for. So that's something I feel that's something they have to do. They have to do it since a long time ago. But better late than never, right? They are doing this right now. So I would say I'm a bit disappointed that should have been there since the very beginning of the previous government. And it took us like another 5 years and a coup to eventually get to the point. So a bit disappointed at that. But for now, the NUG with people from different background, I would say some of the people are like my colleagues that I work together with for the Rohingya crisis. And so I genuinely believe they have a genuine political will. But I can't guarantee all of us have the same will and same understanding on the Rohingya population, and not just on the Rohingya population, but also there are different questions that we have to raise to some of the key figures about the racism, discrimination, sexism, for example, like very basic things, right? Because all these politicians currently in the power positions, I feel like their generation was the generation that they had to try really harder in the past 30 years against the military junta, and they didn't learn about how to be principle-based, how to be value-based, how to be a proper politicians with core principles, right? So they were born out of the ashes. That's how I see. So I think it's very important that we call out to them as young generations, and also they have to also be open up and also admit what they don't know. And if they make mistakes, they have to apologize. This very basic, but we are being suspicious with some of the key figures in the NUG, but at the same time, we're being hopeful with our friends in the NUG. So what happened with the Rohingya situation paper is somewhat a result of our collective advocacy to the NUG. Like I met with the vice presidents like 2 weeks before the position paper, and I had talked to him about like why, as a young woman in the country, been talking about them and so on. They also, civil society have published statements and open statement to lobby directly, and the NUG been adapting to that civil society points about the Rohingya and so on. But at the same time, if I were a Rohingya, I would still have different questions, because it just happened within 6 months. And what makes us to just believe in 100% of what's happening, right? It's so quick, and it is so easy that the Rohingya will be exploited, like politically exploited. We will be super careful. I would be super careful. So that's natural. The Rohingya population community is still being careful with what the NUG is doing. So it will take time. NUG have to try harder, like twice or thrice, to prove that they are genuine. They have a strong political will for their well-being of the Rohingya population. So, for example, abolition the 1982 citizenship law, something they could do quite easily, but they haven't done it yet. So that raised a lot of questions for now.
I think they're still dragging their feet on the citizenship point. I mean, they vaguely talked about political rights, but I think in a later press conference, they also said that, the citizenship law can be amended only when we go for a new constitution, which is essentially putting the horse before the cart, and that might, delay the entire process. So yeah, I agree with you. Even if I was a representative from the Rohingya community, I would also be completely very, very careful about how, I am used by bigger forces within the political structure, right? So yeah, I think I completely agree with you on that. Martin sir, there's a lot to talk about, we could go on and on. But there's one thing I really need to ask you. What do you think, people on the ground, how do you think people on the ground look at the ASEAN process at the moment? There's a special envoy in place, and there's a 5-point consensus which was agreed upon. But as we have seen so far very clearly, that nothing much has happened, despite the appointment of the Bruneian second minister as a special envoy. But the negotiations haven't really happened, and there's this sense that the Myanmar military regime is actually using ASEAN to legitimize itself, and ASEAN is reciprocating very well. So how do you think people on the ground, again, especially the younger people, how do you think they look at this entire ASEAN process? Do they trust this process, or do they absolutely think this process is nothing but a delaying tactic?
ASEAN's been long like that. ASEAN has been the same long time ago. They have never changed. They still remain as a dictator club, as many people have seen that. But why? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Why ASEAN stay matter? Why ASEAN play a key role? It's mainly because of the legal responsibility displayed by the other different countries, like in the region. For example, India government, for example, China government, for example, the Australians, So they have to step up to make sure the ASEAN is doing better, or even they can replace the ASEANs from dealing the matter inside country, to be a better negotiation, or to be a better process. Because how ASEAN's been dealing with Myanmar failed. Not even what ASEAN was dealing, but also the Western government, the US government, and different European government. For example, 2006 constitution is a failed process. We have a lot to learn from the process. Like why it was a failed process. We have to reevaluate ourselves and take a bigger role, basically for the neighboring country, Bangladesh, for example, for India, Bangladesh, for example, having a lot of interaction regarding the Rohingya crisis. If Myanmar is peaceful, if Myanmar is democratic, then Rohingya population that they are having a burden with can easily and freely return, a dignified return. So it's so important for Bangladesh government as well as for Indian government to take a more visible roles, in dealing with, in facilitating or helping the communities in the Myanmar, because ASEAN is already a failure. Nobody questioned that, and not even a question anymore, right?
Yeah, the only problem is that most of the big powers in the region, including India and China, have put all their eggs in one basket, which is the ASEAN basket, which I don't think is honestly the best strategy ahead, because as we see, ASEAN has simply been dragging its feet when it comes to the Myanmar, and they see it as an increasingly difficult and complex issue, but that's what they keep saying. It's a difficult and complex issue and doesn't move ahead from there. So yeah, I agree with you. I think countries like India, who have a leverage over the Myanmar military also, should play a much more prominent role in facilitating a regional solution, and not just talk about a regional solution at the UN Security Council or the General Assembly, but actually, lead that regional solution. But personally speaking, since I look at Indian foreign policy on Myanmar closely, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But let's hope there is someone sitting in the foreign ministry who has a good sense of of how to move things ahead. But I mean, one last point I think, which is always almost the elephant in the room, in discussions about Myanmar and the region, which is China. We hear a lot about sort of state narratives or sort of government narratives on China, right? Sort of formalized narratives. But I want to know from you, how do the people on the ground look at China today in Myanmar, and how do they see the Chinese influence in Myanmar, including not just its support of the Myanmar regime, but its broader sort of political and economic agenda in Myanmar, including the Belt and Road Initiative projects. So is China seen as a force for good in Myanmar today, or is it seen as some kind of a very, very disruptive entity?
I think the country that trying to look forward to become the best friend with China would be Myanmar. Myanmar always wanted to rely on China. Even general public, we look up to China. We grew up with Chinese movie, dramas. We love Chinese culture, their food, cuisine, everything. So we are basically a mix of India and China. So there are a lot of Chinese communities integrating in Myanmar's society as well, and we are doing good, like in harmony. But the point is, what makes us feel we are being threatened by China is because of their own action. Myanmar has been always trying to be a good friend to China, like successive governments trying to work together with Chinese government and so on. But still, Myanmar people ended up, being angry at Chinese government and their intervention. The main point is they're being hypocritic with what they're saying, like not interfering in internet politics, trying to prevent the ASEAN and different neighboring countries to intervene in the country with the non-interference policy. But they are the ones basically trying to control of the Myanmar military, Myanmar ethnic army, even the newly formed army, like Arakan army, they are in contact with them. And so what are they doing? Like they're also in good terms with the previous NLD government. But when the leaders being detained, they are not really acting. Like they're just trying to step aside and trying to see the situation, take advantage of it. So that's basically the Chinese the self-interest policy. So that what makes the people in Myanmar be outraged for the Chinese government, especially the CCP. There was a recent protest against the CCP, and I think not just in Myanmar, also the whole region feel the same thing. So something is already wrong with the Chinese government policy and their manipulation in the region. So, Chinese government being saying they want to keep that Sino-Myanmar relationship, but if they really want to keep this, they have to prove it. They're not doing this, and And the young generation, basically, who are in their 20s, already hated the Chinese Communist Party, and this is no good for a future. Like, because these young people will be future figures, like in the next government, they will be president, they will be prime minister, and the way they will be reacting to a Chinese Communist Party will not be good, because that's their first-hand experiences now by the Chinese government. Like they say, the military is in power. Basically, military is just a small number of people who have guns and weapons. Basically, the young people, 60% of the population are actually in power, because they belong to the future. They will decide for the future.
So, given everything that's happening, and as we reach the end of this conversation, I have a very simple question for you. What does the way ahead look like for people like you, for the newer generations in Myanmar, given everything that has happened so far, and given the brutal nature of this regime, and also the sort of the unpredictable COVID-19 situation? I know large-scale protests have sort of died down compared to the first few months. But what does the path ahead look like for the revolution?
The revolution is kind of evolving to a different forms now, but the main principle and the basic around the front lines are the same. Now, many people are kind of experienced with the protests, like flash strikes, so they know exactly how to avoid the military detection and how to organize flash strikes within a minute, within like 10 minutes, and then disappear. So people are getting experience with that. At the same time, so as I say, the front lines, there are three main front lines. It's still going on, and it's going hand in hand. So the first front line is the political front line. So we are having NUG now. It's already trying to form a new constitution. They have different commissions now, and NUCC Consolidated Council is already formed and is now working, and so on. At the same time, the other different political, there are different ongoing campaigns for the credential challenge in the UN in September. At the same time, there are different advocacy also going on to cut the ends and catch the impunity, like how to reform Myanmar to the situation, Myanmar situations to ICC and ICJ, for example. So these are the front line, as well as the AMS front line is also going strong. The different ethnic arms army are now stepping up to fight against the junta and the military forces, and we are seeing more calls. Like now, recently, the Mon ethnic leaders have just called like it's not good to align with the army, but to support the NUG, and he started calling for the M resistance from Mon populations. It will happen to Arakan people as well, and then all the EAO members were. We have a chance to fight against the junta. And so that's something that we have never seen in the past 70 years. At the same time, all these front lines, political or ends front lines, must be guided by the ideological front line. So the ideological revolution is still going on. Like basically, we talk about what should be our basic principle, why we should obey the Geneva Convention, for example, when we are having an end conflict. So human rights and democracy, we are different from the junta and the atrocity. So that's how I think we are keeping and trying to shape the whole revolution. It's all-round revolutions from different communities, everyone getting involved, every generation, from every sector. So that's how I feel the revolution is taking its shape after 6 months long. Still, strikes are going on every day on the streets, as well as CDM is still going. There are different campaigns like digital campaigns and trainings, and civil society also trying to trying to survive amid different challenges. So if we're not winning this time, I don't think we will ever have another chance.
Right. I think that's a very sort of definitive assertion, and makes sense to me also. It's a very complex situation on the ground, a complex political and security situation on the ground. But I think what we should all remember is that at the heart of it, this is a humanitarian crisis. It's a profound degradation of the very dignity of human life and the human existence, and how because of the brutal assault that it has faced from the regime in the past 6-7 months. But Thinzar, thank you so much for answering my questions with so much clarity and vision. And I think we have covered a lot of ground. We have spoken for nearly an hour, but I don't regret it at all. I think this was a very rich conversation, and I really hope the situation, sitting here in India, I can't do much but hope that the situation there gets better on all fronts, including the pandemic. And I really wish you all the best with your activism. I think you are doing God's work in Myanmar right now, people like you. There's this big sense of inspiration that we people here sitting here in India, especially younger people like me, draw from those like you who have been so much on the ground and so much plugged into not just building local sort of resistance, but also expanding the resistance to other places and across generations. So thank you so much for doing that, and also thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and I really hope that you will join me for a future conversation on Myanmar and how the situation develops at a later stage.